Hello and welcome to the Cosmic Earth. Tonight, let us drift backward through the great corridors of time to an era when the world was sculpted by frost and silence. A time when the Earth, as you know it today, wore a different face. An endless expanse of white and blue, an ancient winter that stretched across continents and oceans. The Ice Age. You might imagine the scene. Towering walls of ice rising like mountains at the edges of the world. Glaciers that groaned and shifted, slowly carving valleys and smoothing stone as if the planet itself were an artist, shaping the landscapes we still walk upon today. Snow fell in endless silence, muffling the sounds of wind and water. Even the sunlight seemed dimmer, its golden warmth softened into silver as it scattered across the frozen plains. The Ice Age was not a single event, but a series of cycles, advances and retreats of ice that lasted for millions of years. The Earth shivered and warmed in rhythms far beyond human memory. Entire ecosystems rose, adapted, and fell beneath the weight of the cold. Imagine the northern continents, blanketed beneath ice sheets thousands of feet thick. They pressed down with such force that the very crust of the Earth bent beneath their weight. Mountains disappeared beneath glaciers. Rivers were dammed and rerouted. Even the seas withdrew, their waters locked away in frozen prisons, lowering the shorelines and exposing lands that connected worlds once thought separate. In these stretches of exposed Earth, creatures walked paths that no longer exist. Mammoths crossing from Siberia to Alaska, hunters following their trails into new lands, unaware that they were stepping into the story of humanity's future. But let us not rush. Tonight, we are here to linger, to close our eyes and walk slowly through this icy age, to listen to the whispers of wind across frozen tundra, to picture the soft breath of giants in the snow, and to feel the patience of a planet sculpted by ice. The Age of Ice was born from delicate balances, tiny shifts in the tilt of Earth's axis, in the orbit around the Sun, in the breadth of oceans that circled the globe. These subtle rhythms, stretched across millennia, determined whether snow melted or endured, whether forests flourished or fields of ice expanded. When winters grew longer and summers could not melt the snows, the white blanket thickened year by year, until glaciers grew from mountain tops, spilling outward, merging and consuming the land, a slow, unstoppable tide of frost. And so, vast portions of the Earth transformed into an alien world. North America, Europe, and Asia disappeared beneath endless sheets of ice. Only the tips of mountains rose above, jagged islands in a frozen sea. To the south, tundra stretched into the horizon, where herds of animals grazed on sparse grasses and mosses, their breath steaming in the cold air. The world was quieter then. No machines, no cities, no hum of electricity. Only the slow thunder of glaciers creaking forward, the wind racing over empty plains, and the muffled sounds of life adapting to survive. If you listen closely in your imagination, you might hear it, the distant crack of ice breaking, echoing across valleys, or the soft crunch of snow beneath heavy paws as a saber-toothed cat stalked its prey. Or perhaps the deep rumble of mammoths calling to each other in voices that once vibrated through the frozen night. It is a strange thought, isn't it? That this frozen past is not as distant as it seems. The last great ice age ended only about 12,000 years ago, a blink in the scale of Earth's history. In some sense, humanity was born into the cold. The first fires that kept our ancestors warm flickered against the icy breath of glaciers nearby. And yet, the Ice Age was not only a world of hardship, it was also a time of beauty. Imagine the skies, clear and sharp, stars burning brighter in the frozen air. Imagine the auroras, shimmering ribbons of green and red spreading across the heavens and reflecting off snowy plains. Imagine the forests at the edges of the ice, where animals gathered, where humans carved tools and painted their stories on stone walls. The Ice Age carved not only the land, but also the spirit of life. It demanded resilience, creativity, and cooperation. And from those demands, something remarkable was shaped. the foundations of human civilization. Even today, you can trace the fingerprints of that frozen era. The valleys of Yosemite, carved smooth by ancient glaciers. The Great Lakes, scooped from the earth by sheets of ice and filled with meltwater when the world began to warm. The soils of fertile plains, ground fine beneath glaciers, feeding harvests for thousands of years to come. The Ice Age is not gone. Its memory lingers in every landscape shaped by frost, in every fossil buried beneath permafrost, in every story of survival passed down through generations. Even the rhythms of our climate still carry its echoes, for the Earth has not forgotten its cycles. So tonight, as we walk together into this frozen past, let us remember, the Age of Ice was not an interruption in Earth's story. It was a chapter that defined what came after, a chapter of silence, of resilience, of beauty shaped by cold. Close your eyes now and picture it, the snow stretching endlessly before you, the horizon blurred by mist where the glacier looms like a wall of crystal, the air sharp, the ground frozen beneath your feet. Somewhere in the distance, a mammoth moves slowly, its fur dusted with frost, each step a quiet defiance against the cold. This is the world we're about to journey through. The frozen earth, alive with giants, sculpted by glaciers, carrying within it the seeds of everything that was yet to come. The Ice Age awaits. A planet draped in silence. That's how the Earth once felt, when vast sheets of ice spread their white arms across the continents, cloaking valleys, rivers, and forests beneath a shroud of cold. Imagine standing there, if you could. The air is still heavy with frost, and even your breath feels like a delicate cloud suspended for too long before vanishing into the emptiness. The Ice Age was not merely a season, nor a winter to be waited out. It was an age in the deepest sense, an era where cold was not a visitor but a ruler. For millions of years, glaciers advanced and retreated like slow, deliberate tides. Whole landscapes were swallowed in silence, reshaped by the sheer weight of frozen time. In these frozen dominions, sound was rare. A crack of shifting ice, the distant groan of a glacier grinding against stone, the muffled call of a lone creature navigating this frozen frontier. And between those moments, long, endless stretches of quiet. You might imagine it as a world asleep, held in a deep breath it would only release thousands of years later. When the sun rose, its light was soft, scattered, refracted through pale skies heavy with ice crystals. Days felt dim, and nights shimmered faintly with stars so sharp and bright they seemed etched into the firmament. It was a silence that did not feel empty, but complete, as if the earth itself had settled into meditation. The silence of this frozen planet was not only physical, it was also ecological. Where great forests had once swayed with rustling leaves, tundra stretched instead, barren and spare. The whispers of the wind brushed over lichens, mosses, and hardy shrubs clinging to the frozen soil. Animal voices were fewer, thinner, softer. The chorus of birdsong was muted. The buzzing of insects was hushed. Life endured, but it did so quietly, carefully, conserving energy as if every sound had to be measured. Picture the world map you know today. Now drape it in white. Vast ice sheets covered what we now call North America, Northern Europe, and Siberia. Ice miles thick lay upon the land, pressing down, crushing mountains, carving valleys, leaving behind the silent geometry of moraines and ridges. Underneath that weight, even the earth seemed to fall still. There is something haunting about such immensity. Entire continents muffled beneath the silence of ice, as though time itself slowed. To walk there, you would hear only your footsteps crunching on snow, amplified by the absence of anything else. But silence is not lifelessness. The frozen world was not dead, only restrained. Beneath that hush, life adapted. Mammoths roamed in herds, their movements slow and steady across the white plains. Saber-toothed cats stalked in patience, each paw placed deliberately. Even early humans, small and scattered, whispered their survival in the stillness, tending faint embers, guarding flame against the winds. And the glaciers, those ancient giants of ice, were never truly still. They groaned as They moved inch by inch, carrying boulders as though they were pebbles, etching scars into the earth. To us, it might have seemed motionless, but over centuries the silence gave way to change. Valleys deepened, rivers were rerouted, mountains were polished smooth. The world in silence was also a world in transformation, working slowly, invisibly, almost beyond perception. If you close your eyes, you might picture the surface of those glaciers. A frozen desert, cracked and veined with lines where the ice shifted, pools of meltwater reflecting the pale sky. And across them, a horizon so endless, so wide, that it blurred the boundary between land and heaven. The silence of the Ice Age was cosmic in scale. Imagine standing beneath the northern lights as they dance silently across the night sky. No human music, no roar of engines, no hum of cities, only the aurora's shifting glow, like curtains of colour unfurling in slow motion. The earth itself seemed like a vast cathedral, its silence a form of prayer. And yet, silence is rarely absolute. Within the stillness were subtle sounds, the delicate crunch of snowflakes beneath the weight of a caribou's hoof, the ripple of water beneath the ice as rivers continued their secret flow, the occasional crash as part of a glacier sheared away and fell into the sea. In the vast expanse of quiet, these sounds felt amplified, like whispers in a cavern, carrying immense weight. For early humans, such silence shaped the soul. To live in the Ice Age was to dwell in patience. Nights were long, and survival was measured in careful steps. The quiet was both companion and challenge. A person might sit by the fire and hear nothing but the crackle of flames and the soft beating of their own heart. The world outside pressed in with its icy stillness, reminding them how small they were, how fragile. And yet, perhaps in that silence, they also found reflection, a space to wonder, a moment to dream. Across the frozen world, the silence stretched for millennia. Entire generations lived and died under its quiet reign. When a child was born, it cried into an air so empty that the sound seemed to linger, carried far across the snow before dissolving. When a hunter walked, the crunch beneath their feet echoed into the night. For them, every sound was important. Every whisper of the land carried meaning. It is difficult for us, surrounded as we are by constant noise, to imagine such a world. Today, silence feels unnatural, almost uncomfortable. Yet on the frozen planet of the Ice Age, silence was simply the background of a life. It was the Earth's own breathing, deep and slow, patient as glaciers. If you let yourself drift into that silence, you might feel the weight of time itself. Seasons passed like shadows, winters blending into each other, summers brief and fragile. The silence reminded life to endure, to adapt, to wait. This frozen quiet shaped more than landscapes. It shaped minds, spirits, cultures. Early humans learned to listen with care, to notice the faintest sounds, to read meaning into silence. From such stillness may have grown the first seeds of wonder, the first sparks of story, the beginnings of reflection on a world larger than themselves. And yet, silence was not permanent. Even as glaciers spread, they began slowly to retreat. The world of stillness was always in motion, though too slow for the eye to catch. The silence would one day give way to rivers rushing again, to forests whispering in the wind, to birds filling the air with song. But for that long age, Earth was held in a pause, as though caught between breaths, a planet frozen in silence, waiting for the warmth of change. As you imagine it now, let the quiet settle into you. Picture the vast white plains, the endless skies, the faint crunch of snow. Allow the silence of that age to wrap around you like a blanket. In that hush, the earth was not barren. It was dreaming, and in that dream the seeds of everything to come were waiting. Imagine a river, but not of water, of ice. A river that does not rush or roar, but creeps forward in silence, carrying with it entire mountains, grinding stone into dust, sculpting valleys, and etching lines into the face of the earth. This is the glacier, the great shaper of worlds. During the Ice Age, glaciers were not small, hidden patches of frozen snow on mountaintops as we see today. They were titans, sheets of ice stretched thousands of miles, flowing outward like frozen oceans, reshaping continents under their weight. They covered North America from the Arctic down toward what is now New York and Chicago. They buried Europe beneath their pale expanse, stretching across Scandinavia, Britain, and into the heart of Germany. In Asia, they reached into Siberia, carving paths that remain visible even now. If you stood before such a glacier, you would not see movement. To the human eye, it seemed frozen, eternal, unmoving. And yet, year after year, century after century, it pressed forward. Snow fell upon snow, layer upon layer, compacting into dense blue ice, and gravity pulled it slowly downwards. It was time incarnate, inching across the land, unstoppable. The weight of these glaciers was unimaginable. In places they were 2 miles thick, so heavy that the very crust of the earth bent beneath them, pressed down like soft clay. Even today, in parts of Canada and Scandinavia, the land is still slowly rising back upward, recovering from the burden of that ice long gone. But glaciers were not just passive blankets of cold. They were sculptors. As they advanced, they carved out valleys, grinding rock beneath them into fine powder known as glacial flour. They gouged fjords, those deep, narrow inlets of the sea now seen in Norway or Alaska. They left behind U-shaped valleys, smooth and wide, where once there had been only rugged peaks. Their passage reshaped mountains into sharper ridges, polished stones into smooth faces, and scattered boulders, erratics, across the plains, far from the mountains where they had been born. You might picture it as a slow-motion chisel carving patiently for millennia, where rivers cut with speed, glaciers sculpted with weight. They left behind a landscape that felt deliberate, as though the earth had paused to create works of art on a planetary scale, and glaciers carried life within their icy grip. Dust and minerals ground down from the rocks were swept forward and released as the ice melted. This enriched the soil, laying the foundation for fertile plains that, long after the ice receded, would become the breadbaskets of humanity. In this way, the glaciers did not only destroy, they also prepared. They shaped not only the contours of valleys, but the very conditions that would later allow civilizations to grow. Consider the Great Lakes in North America. Those vast bodies of water, so integral to the region's identity, were carved out by glaciers. As the ice sheets advanced, they gouged deep basins into the earth. When they retreated, meltwater filled the hollows, leaving behind a chain of lakes so large they appear as inland seas. To this day, they are reminders of the glacier's colossal reach. In Europe, the glaciers left behind the rolling hills and fertile soils of northern Germany and Poland, the winding fjords of Scandinavia, and the loess plains that would nurture future harvests. Across the globe, the fingerprints of glaciers remain etched in the terrain. Moraine ridges, kettle lakes, carved cliffs, and stony plains scattered like whispers of an ancient architect. Now imagine the sounds of such shaping. Not the speed of rivers rushing, but deep resonant groans as ice pressed against rock, cracks echoing as crevasses opened, the sudden thunder of ice carving from the glacier's edge into the sea, and always the silence between, as if the world were holding its breath while the glaciers worked their will. For early humans, these landscapes would have seemed both intimidating and awe-inspiring. To walk beside a glacier was to walk beside a wall of frozen time, towering and impassable. The edges of glaciers were borders between worlds, the frozen deserts above and the living plains below. To cross them was to enter into a realm of silence and cold, where survival was uncertain. But even as glaciers dominated the land, they were never fixed in place. They advanced and retreated in cycles following the rhythm of the Earth's climate. Over tens of thousands of years they moved forward, then withdrew, like great breaths of ice inhaling and exhaling across the continents. In their advance, they erased. In their retreat, they revealed. Each cycle left the world a little different, a little more sculpted, a little more prepared for the life that would follow. Think for a moment of the journey of a single stone. Once part of a mountain peak, it was plucked up by the moving ice, carried hundreds of miles away, and set down in a place it had never known. Today, such stones rest quietly on plains, monuments to journeys longer than any river could carve. Farmers ploughing fields in Europe and America still strike these glacial erratics, left behind as silent witnesses of an ancient voyage. And beneath the glaciers, hidden rivers flowed. Meltwater carved tunnels within the ice, rushing in secret, depositing sands and gravels in winding patterns. When the glaciers melted, these deposits formed ridges known as eskers, snaking across the land like the traces of forgotten rivers. Everywhere the glaciers touched, they left behind mysteries, patterns, and shapes that tell their story long after the ice itself is gone. It is humbling to imagine. The world we know, the fertile soils we plant in, the lakes we drink from, the valleys where cities rise, all of it bears the fingerprints of those frozen giants. They were not just destroyers, not just cold invaders. They were creators, architects of the Earth's present form. And if you listen closely, even now, the glaciers still speak. In Greenland and Antarctica, the last great ice sheets remain, slowly moving, still carving, still shaping. They remind us of that age when ice ruled the continents. To stand beside them today is to stand in the echo of the Ice Age, to glimpse the same titanic forces that once draped the earth in silence and sculpture. Perhaps this is why glaciers stir something in us. Their beauty is quiet, their presence overwhelming, their persistence eternal. They move too slowly for our eyes, but they mark time in ways deeper than calendars or clocks. They remind us that the earth itself is patient, that its transformations are not measured in years or centuries, but in millennia. As you let this image rest in your mind, picture the world beneath their passage. Smooth valleys, carved fjords, scattered stones, fertile plains, all gifts of ice. The glaciers did not merely shape the land, they shaped the possibilities of life, laying the stage for forests, rivers, animals, and eventually the fragile beginnings of civilization. In their silence, they were sculptors. In their weight, they were storytellers. The story they left behind is written in every valley, every lake, every polished stone. And though they have retreated, their presence remains, whispering to us through the landscapes we walk every day. The glaciers shaped the world, and in doing so, they shaped us too. In the stillness of the Ice Age, when glaciers pressed against the continents and silence stretched across the horizon, life did not vanish. Instead, it adapted. From the frozen plains and windswept tundra, from the edges of the forests and the margins of the ice emerged the giants. They were creatures of immense size and quiet strength, clothed in fur, muscle, and resilience. They walked slowly across the snowbound earth, leaving deep impressions that lasted until the winds buried them. Imagine, if you can, standing on a frozen plain and watching a herd of mammoths move in unison. Their shaggy coats ripple in the cold air, their curved tusks gleam faintly in the pale sun, and the ground trembles softly beneath their weight. The mammoth was the icon of this world. Taller than any elephant alive today, with tusks that could reach longer than a grown human, these great beings thrived where few others could. They grazed on hardy grasses and shrubs that managed to pierce the frozen soil. Their thick fur and fat insulated them against the biting cold. In herds, they moved like slow rivers of life across the tundra, their young shielded within the circle of adults. To see them was to witness survival sculpted by ice and time, and the mammoths were not alone. There were mastodons, distant cousins with straighter tusks and broader bodies, feeding on the leaves of coniferous trees. There were woolly rhinoceroses, massive creatures armoured with thick fur and horns long and sharp, wandering the icy steppe like armoured ghosts. Steppe bison, larger than modern buffalo, roamed in great numbers, their heavy shoulders pushing through drifts of snow. And then, among these peaceful giants stalked predators. Saber-toothed cats, their fangs curved like daggers, moved with silent precision. They were not the roaring beasts of our imagination, but patient hunters, watching from shadows, conserving energy in a world where every chase could mean survival or death. There were cave lions too, larger than any lions today, hunting in groups, their presence both regal and fearsome. Above, giant birds once soared, wings outstretched against the pale skies. On the ground, packs of dire wolves trotted across the snow, their paws leaving delicate trails in the whiteness. These wolves were stronger, larger, and more resilient than their descendants, perfectly adapted to the challenges of the Ice Age. All these creatures lived within the delicate balance of the frozen world. Food was scarce, winters long, summers brief. To be large was to endure, to store warmth and strength within the body. To be small was to be clever, to hide, to scavenge. And so, the plains, valleys, and icy forests became a stage upon which giants and survivors played their roles in silence. Imagine the sounds of this world. The low rumble of mammoths calling to one another, deep voices carried across the tundra, the muffled crunch of snow beneath massive feet, the sudden cry of a predator striking, followed by silence once more. These were not the constant noises of a bustling world, but rare, important sounds, each one carrying meaning across the frozen air. For early humans, the giants were both danger and gift. A mammoth could provide food, warmth, tools, and shelter for an entire group. Its bones could be shaped into huts, its hide into clothing, its fat into firelight. Yet to hunt one was perilous, requiring cooperation, patience, and immense courage. The giants were not merely animals, they were forces of nature. To bring one down was to earn survival and perhaps even reverence. And so, humans painted them on cave walls. In the flickering light of fire, images of mammoths, bison, and rhinoceroses came to life on stone. These paintings, still visible tens of thousands of years later, suggest awe, respect, and perhaps a kind of spiritual bond. The giants were not just prey, they were part of a larger story, part of the Earth's frozen soul. But what made these giants thrive during the Ice Age? The answer lies in the land itself. The tundra steppe, though cold, was vast and rich in grasses. When glaciers advanced, they locked away water, lowering sea levels and exposing more land. Huge plains opened across Siberia, Europe, and the Americas. Here, grasses grew in abundance, hardy and nutritious, feeding herds that stretched to the horizon. For giants, this was paradise, a cold paradise, but one suited perfectly to their size and strength. And yet, nothing lasts forever. The giants' reign was long but fragile. As climates shifted and ice retreated, forests spread once more across the plains. Grasslands shrank, and with them, the food that sustained mammoths and bison. Hunting pressure from humans increased. Slowly, one by one, the giants vanished. Today, only echoes remain. The elephant, the bison, the rhinoceros, smaller and scattered descendants of a world once filled with giants. But let us linger, not on their loss, but on their presence. Picture the steppe again. A herd of woolly rhinoceroses moves slowly across the snow, their horns casting long shadows in the pale light. Mammoths graze nearby, steam rising gently from their bodies into the cold air. In the distance, a lion stalks, silent and regal. The world is alive with giants, each one an embodiment of survival against the cold. The Ice Age was not merely about ice, it was about life. Strange, immense, magnificent life that adapted to silence, cold, and scarcity. The giants remind us that even in the harshest times, Earth finds a way to create abundance. They were living monuments to resilience, as much a part of the Ice Age as the glaciers themselves. And though they are gone, we carry them with us. In fossils, in cave paintings, in myths of great beasts told around ancient fires. Their memory lingers in our imagination, in the stories we tell of mammoths and saber-toothed cats, of wolves and bison that ruled the frozen plains. In many ways, they still walk. With us, their shadows etched into the landscapes they once shaped. As you drift through this vision of the past, allow the giants to pass before you. Hear their footsteps in the snow. Feel the ground tremble softly beneath their weight. Watch their silhouettes move across the horizon, patient and eternal. For in the frozen stillness of the Ice Age, the giants were not merely survivors, they were the heartbeat of a world asleep beneath the snow. Let's drift now, not upon the land where glaciers carved valleys and giants walked the snow, but toward the endless oceans of the Ice Age. Because though ice ruled the continents, it also claimed the seas. Beneath frozen skies, the oceans themselves were transformed into vast keepers of cold, their tides bound to the rhythm of glaciers and the silent hand of time. Imagine yourself standing on a cliff that overlooks the sea, 40,000 years ago. Below you is not the ocean you know, blue, restless, forever churning. Instead, the water lies lower, pulled away from shorelines, locked in mountains of ice far inland. The horizon looks strange. Islands are larger, coastlines stretch farther, and new lands emerge where now there is only water. Whole continents seem redrawn, as though the earth itself has exhaled and revealed its bones. Sea levels during the Ice Age were over 400 feet lower than today. Entire regions now drowned beneath waves were dry land then. The English Channel did not yet divide Britain from Europe. It was a wide, grassy plain, crossed by rivers, where herds of mammoth and reindeer grazed. Between Siberia and Alaska lay the Bering Land Bridge, a corridor of tundra steppe that joined Asia to the Americas. Across it moved animals, plants, and eventually the first humans who would walk into a new world. The oceans had receded because so much water was imprisoned in ice. Vast sheets on North America, Greenland, and Eurasia held volumes that reshaped the globe. In their frozen silence, they pulled the seas downward, binding waves into stillness. Imagine the oceans breathing slower, their tides whispering beneath skies heavy with frost. Yet the seas themselves were far from lifeless. Beneath the surfaces, life continued, adapted, transformed, endured. Cold currents moved with greater force, carrying nutrients through the deep. In many places, the abundance of plankton grew, feeding great shoals of fish, whales, and seabirds that wheeled above the coasts. The frozen world was not barren. It was simply different. Picture the coasts of the Ice Age. Instead of busy shores lined with modern cities, you would find long stretches of tundra meeting the sea. Icebergs drifted far from the poles, their white towers rising from the water like floating cathedrals. Seals rested upon their edges, and polar bears hunted where sea met ice. In some seasons, the seas froze almost entirely, locking whole bays beneath white sheets, turning waves into silence. And beneath this frozen cover, the oceans breathed quietly. Strange forms of life endured in the darkness, some much as they do today. Fish with antifreeze proteins in their blood swam in waters cold enough to kill other creatures. Plankton drifted beneath the ice, blooming in bursts of light when the brief summer sun returned. Whales passed through, their low songs echoing beneath the frozen ceilings, ancient voices reverberating in water darker than night. It is humbling to imagine how much the oceans shaped the life of the Ice Age on land as well. The drop in sea level created vast corridors of migration. Animals crossed continents following fresh grasses, and humans followed them. The first great journeys of our ancestors, out of Africa, across Asia, into the Americas, were only possible because the oceans had retreated, revealing the hidden bridges of Earth. Without those frozen seas, the story of humanity would have been very different, and the coasts themselves became rich theatres of life. Where rivers poured into the lowered seas, they created deltas and wetlands that drew birds, fish, and mammals. Early humans too were drawn there, finding food and shelter. You might picture them standing on a shore watching whales breach in the distance, or seals gathered on the ice, knowing that in these places life was abundant even in a frozen age. Yet the oceans also carried danger. Storms were fierce, driven by colder winds and sharper contrasts between sea and ice. Gigantic waves crashed against cliffs, their spray freezing in the air, coating rocks in glassy rime. Icebergs drifted into unexpected waters, hazards for those who dared to venture onto the seas. For early humans who moved along coasts, the oceans must have seemed vast, unpredictable, and filled with mystery. But the greatest mysteries were beneath. Even now, the seafloors that were once dry land hold traces of the Ice Age world. Beneath the North Sea lie the remains of Doggerland, once a wide plain of grass, rivers and forests, where humans lived and hunted, where animals roamed freely. Now it sleeps beneath waves, its memory preserved in fragments of bone, stone tools, and pollen that drift upward from the seabed. Beneath the waves, entire landscapes are hidden, ghostly echoes of a frozen earth. Let yourself drift further into this vision. Imagine the Arctic Ocean locked in ice, its surface stretching endlessly, reflecting pale sunlight. Beneath, narwhals swam with their spiral tusks glimmering in the dim light. Bowhead whales, massive and enduring, lived centuries in those waters, feeding on plankton blooms when summer returned. To hear their low, mournful songs would have been to listen to time itself speaking in the deep. Farther south, oceans too felt the touch of the Ice Age. The Mediterranean was narrower, with shores reaching farther outward. The islands were closer, the seas less deep. In the Pacific, vast stretches of land connected islands now separated by wide waves. The rhythm of tides, winds, and migrations tied together worlds we now think of as distant. And across every coast, the skies carried the sound of seabirds. Colonies of puffins, gulls, and cormorants nested on cliffs, their calls echoing against the frozen waters. Each spring their wings darkened the horizon as they returned, faithful to the seas that sustained them. Even in silence the ocean spoke, through the cries of birds, the splash of whales, the grinding of icebergs, the eternal rhythm of waves. For early humans, the ocean must have seen both boundary and promise. To stand at the edge of the sea was to look into mystery, to wonder what lay beyond the horizon. Perhaps some dared to follow it. Rafts of wood, skins stretched across frames, simple boats carved from trees. They may have carried explorers across narrow straits revealed by the Ice Age seas. In time, such journeys would link continents and people, but their first steps were taken under frozen skies. The locked oceans also carried a strange beauty. At night the surface shone with stars reflected in dark water, doubled against the sky. Icebergs glimmered faintly, ghostly shapes adrift in silence. The auroras shimmered above, their lights mirrored in frozen seas, turning the horizon into a dreamscape of colour. You might picture yourself standing there, wrapped in furs, the cold biting at your cheeks, staring into a sky and sea that felt endless and eternal. But beneath this beauty was always change. The oceans, though stilled, were restless. Slowly the glaciers melted, releasing their waters back into the sea. Bit by bit, coastlines shifted, plains disappeared, and land bridges drowned. The world humans had known vanished beneath the waves. Villages, hunting grounds, sacred places, all lost, leaving only stories, myths of floods, and memories carried forward. And still today, the oceans whisper of that time. In their depths lie forests now gone, valleys that once echoed with animal cries, plains that bore the footsteps of mammoths and men. The seas are keepers of memory, holding within them the frozen age when the earth's water was locked beneath skies heavy with ice. As you let this vision settle, picture the oceans of the Ice Age not as empty, but as guardians, guardians of land, of life, of change. They breathed slower, but they endured. They shaped journeys, they carried mysteries, they bore witness to a world both harsher and more abundant than we can easily imagine. The oceans locked beneath frozen skies remind us that the earth is not fixed. Its shores, its waters, its depths all shift with time, expanding, retreating, reshaping the very stage upon which life unfolds. And for a time, in the frozen quiet of the Ice Age, the oceans too bowed to the rule of ice. So now close your eyes and imagine the sound of waves softened by frozen air. Picture the white cliffs rising above seas drawn back, revealing plains where animals roam. Watch the slow drift of icebergs across the horizon and hear the faint low song of a whale beneath the ice. These are the oceans of the Ice Age, silent, altered, enduring. A world where water itself was bound in stillness, dreaming of the day when the ice would melt and tides would rise again. In the silence of the Ice Age, when glaciers pressed down upon the land and herds of mammoths wandered across the frozen plains, one small, flickering light began to change everything. It was fragile, almost delicate, and yet more powerful than any saber-toothed predator, more transformative than any glacier. It was fire, the first spark of humanity's mastery over nature. Imagine for a moment the cold, not the chill of a winter evening, but the relentless, bone-deep cold of a world gripped by ice. Nights stretched long and dark, winds howled across the tundra, and snow pressed in against the shelters of early humans. Without fire, warmth was fleeting, fragile, and lives were short. But with it, there came light, heat, safety, and something more. A sense that humanity had begun to carve out a place for itself in a world of giants and silence. The first fires of humanity were not made by human hands. They were borrowed from lightning that struck the dry steppe, from volcanoes that spilled their glowing embers, from the smouldering remains of forest fires. Our ancestors must have gathered these flames with trembling awe, carrying them carefully, feeding them with wood, guarding them through the long nights. To keep a flame alive was to keep survival alive. It was a duty as sacred as it was practical. Over time, though, humans learned not only to borrow fire, but to make it. A spark struck from stone, the friction of wood against wood, the patient breath coaxing smoke into flame. This was the true dawn of mastery. To summon fire at will was to command light in the darkness, warmth in the cold, and power in a world that had so often rendered them powerless. Picture a small group gathered around one of these first fires. The snow falls quietly outside their shelter. The wind rattles against the walls of hides stretched over bone. But inside there is warmth. The fire glows, its orange light dancing across their faces, casting shadows that flicker like spirits on the walls. Children press close to its heat. Hunters return from the tundra, their breath steaming, their bodies weary, and they rest by the flames. For the first time, there is not just survival, but comfort. The fire brought safety. Predators, cautious of flame, lingered at a distance. The dark beyond the fire's glow remained mysterious, but within its circle humans felt protected. The fire became a boundary, a guardian against the vast silent night. It brought food. Meat once tough and dangerous to eat could now be roasted, softened, preserved. Roots and plants became edible. Fire unlocked nutrition hidden within the land, granting energy that sustained longer lives and stronger bodies. With each meal shared by the flames, humanity grew healthier, more resilient, more capable of enduring the frozen world. And it brought community. Around the fire, people gathered not only to eat, but to speak, to share, to dream. Words took shape in the warmth, stories were told, knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. The fire became more than heat. It became a center of meaning, a place where the mind could expand beyond mere survival. Imagine the first stories told around the flames. Perhaps they spoke of the mammoth herds, of the great cats that prowled the night, of the ancestors who had come before. Perhaps they sang softly, their voices mingling with the crackle of the fire, weaving songs that would echo through centuries. The fire did not just warm the body, it warmed the imagination. The symbolism of fire is not an invention of later ages. Even then, in the frozen heart of the Ice Age, it must have felt sacred. To hold flame in your hand was to hold a fragment of the sun, captured and tamed, brought down to earth. The fire was light against darkness, life against cold, hope against despair. It was, in many ways, the first tool that allowed humans to see themselves as different, as more than just another animal of the frozen plains. But fire also demanded care. It consumed endlessly, feeding on wood, bone, dried grass, anything that could burn. To let it die was a tragedy. For rekindling it was difficult, sometimes impossible in the depths of winter. Families learned to guard embers, to carry smouldering coals wrapped in moss or bark as they travelled, keeping the spark alive across miles of tundra. The fire was not just a resource, it was a companion, carried tenderly like a heartbeat of warmth. As humans learned to control fire, They began to shape their environments. Forests could be burned to drive animals into open ground or to encourage the growth of new plants. Camps could be established in colder regions, protected by fire's warmth. With each use, humanity grew more confident, more capable of bending the frozen world to its needs. The glaciers still ruled, but within their shadow, fire gave humans a throne of their own, and fire brought vision. In the darkness of caves, flames revealed walls that became canvases. With charcoal and ochre, humans painted mammoths, bison, and hunters, lit by flickering light that made the images seem to move. The caves became theatres of memory, where the firelight turned stone into story. Without fire, those paintings would never have come alive. Fire was not only practical, it was creative, an inspiration for the earliest art, the earliest ritual, the earliest dreams of something greater. Consider also the spiritual bond fire must have carried. To see sparks born from stone or wood must have felt miraculous, as though calling forth life from lifelessness. Perhaps early humans believed fire was a gift from the heavens, a secret entrusted to them by spirits or gods. Its warmth was not only physical, but also symbolic, a promise that they were not alone in the frozen silence. The fire connected humanity to the cosmos. When they gazed at the flames, perhaps they saw the sun reflected in miniature, a reminder of the warmth hidden beyond the long cold winters. When they saw sparks fly upward into the night, perhaps they imagined them as stars, tiny souls joining the sky. In the glow of the fire, humans learned to see patterns, connections, meaning. And so, the first fires of humanity were more than survival. They were transformation. With them, people began to step into a different role, no longer just shaped by the Ice Age, but shaping it in return. The fire gave them endurance, imagination, and identity. Imagine again that scene. A small circle of people huddled around flame in a world of snow. Outside, the wind howls. The glaciers groan in the distance. Predators roam the darkness. But within that circle, there is warmth, safety, and the beginning of something entirely new. This moment, repeated countless times across continents, across centuries, was the quiet birth of human culture. The glaciers carved valleys, the oceans shifted shorelines, the giants walked the snow, but fire shaped humanity. It gave us the strength to endure the Ice Age and the vision to imagine a future beyond it. And perhaps, even now, when we gather by fires, when we sit by candlelight, when we are drawn to the glow of flame, we feel something ancient stirring within us. We feel the memory of those first sparks in the frozen night, the fragile warmth that became the heart of who we are. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the glow of that first fire flickering in darkness, surrounded by faces watching with awe. Hear the crackle, the soft murmur of voices, the sigh of relief as warmth returns to cold hands. This was the beginning, the first fires of humanity, fragile lights in a frozen world, destined to illuminate all of history. Imagine yourself standing at the very boundary where life and death meet. Before you stretches a land gripped by endless frost, its rivers frozen, its winds sharp as blades. Behind you lies the thin shelter of firelight, fragile against the immensity of cold. This was the edge of existence during the Ice Age, a world where survival was not guaranteed, where every breath drawn was an act of endurance, and where the smallest choices, how to build a fire, how to track an animal, how to endure a storm, meant the difference between life continuing and life fading into silence. The Ice Age was not only a landscape of frozen rivers and towering glaciers, it was a crucible. It forged life into forms of astonishing resilience. Plants, animals, and humans alike were shaped by this testing ground of cold, pressed against the edge of extinction, yet finding ways to endure. Close your eyes and picture it. The wind scours the tundra, carrying grains of ice that sting the skin. The sky is vast, pale, and heavy with the weight of clouds. In this harshness, a small group of early humans huddle around a low fire, its smoke curling against the dim light of dawn. They wrap themselves in furs stitched together with bone needles, their hands rough, their movements deliberate. Every ember is precious. Every scrap of food is a treasure. This was life on the edge of cold. At the heart of survival was warmth. Without it, no creature could endure the long nights or the sudden plunges of temperature. Fire was more than light. It was life itself. Early humans learned to coax flame from friction, from sparks, from flint striking stone. Imagine the relief when that first flicker caught and grew, spreading heat against the dark. Around fires, stories were told, tools were crafted, wounds were healed. The fire was not only physical, it was emotional, a symbol of endurance, a reminder that even in the coldest world, warmth could still exist. Shelter, too, became an art form born of necessity. Humans built huts of mammoth bone, covered with hides to trap warmth. Others carved into caves, letting stone shield them from the biting winds. Within these spaces smoke rose, children slept, and communities survived. These shelters, though simple, were fortresses against the endless cold. Survival also meant food, and food meant the hunt. Across the frozen plains, herds of reindeer and bison moved like rivers of life, their migrations offering sustenance to those who could track them. Early humans learned to follow the subtle signs: a broken branch, a trail pressed into snow, a distant sound carried on the wind. The mammoth, immense and powerful, became both a source of awe and of sustenance. To hunt one was perilous, requiring coordination, courage, and ingenuity. But the reward was immense: meat to feed many, hides for warmth, bones for tools. Imagine the tension of such a hunt, the breath of hunters rising in the icy air, the thud of feet in the snow, the silence before, the final strike. It was survival at its rawest, a dance between predator and prey. Yet humans were not the only hunters. The cold world belonged also to wolves, to saber-toothed cats, to bears that prowled the frozen forests. To survive was to live in balance, not only taking, but avoiding being taken. At the edge of cold, every step into the wild carried risk. We often think of survival in terms of food and fire, but clothing was equally vital. Early humans became masters of transformation, turning the remains of animals into shields against the elements. Hides softened and stitched became coats, sinew became thread, furs became boots, gloves, and hoods. Layer by layer, the body was insulated, protected against the world's harshest breath. Think of how intricate this process was. Bone needles piercing hide, threads woven with care, garments shaped not for fashion but for life itself. Clothing was technology, one of humanity's earliest inventions, born of necessity, refined by generations. Without it, the edge of cold would have claimed them all. But perhaps the greatest tool of all was not fire, nor spear, nor clothing. It was knowledge. Survival was never the triumph of a single moment. It was the accumulation of lessons passed from one generation to the next. Which plants could be eaten, which roots dug from frozen soil, which caves offered shelter, which rivers froze too thin to cross. These were the fragments of wisdom that ensured survival. Imagine the quiet scene. An elder crouched by a fire, showing a child how to strike flint, how to sharpen stone, how to follow the stars to guide a journey. The knowledge was fragile, passed in whispers and gestures, but it was stronger than ice, for in memory and teaching humanity endured. There is something deeply humbling in imagining how people lived at the edge of cold. Their lives were stripped to essentials: warmth, food, shelter, community. And yet, even then, they found room for art, for beauty, for meaning. In caves lit by flickering firelight, they painted mammoths and bison, horses and hunters. These images were not necessary for survival, and yet they endure, carved into stone as proof of something more. Proof that even in the coldest times the human spirit longed not only to live, but to express. What does this tell us? That survival was not only about resisting death, but about affirming life, about finding ways to say, we were here, we endured, we dreamed. Now, as you reflect on survival at the edge of cold, let your mind drift to our own time. The ice that once ruled the earth has retreated, but the challenges remain. The resilience born in those frozen ages still flows within us. We are descendants of survivors, those who learned to build fire, to craft clothing, to endure storms, to dream even in darkness. Their world was harsher than ours, and yet they thrived. And so, when you think of challenges in your own life, imagine yourself at that fire surrounded by endless winter. Remember that you too carry within you the strength to endure. The Ice Age was not gentle. It was not forgiving. It pressed life to the edge, to the very limits of what was possible, and yet it was also a teacher. It taught humanity how to adapt, how to innovate, how to persevere. It was, in its way, a proving ground. So tonight, as you rest, carry with you the echo of those fires, the warmth of those shelters, the resilience of those who came before. Imagine the edge of cold and the courage it took to survive there. Let that courage be a quiet reminder. You are part of a lineage that has endured the harshest winters of the world. And even here, now, in your quiet moment of rest, that endurance is alive within you. The Earth has always been a restless planet, its surface shifting and reshaping across the ages. Mountains rise, seas flood, deserts expand, and forests bloom. But during the Ice Age, the balance of power tilted. It was not rivers, forests, or deserts that defined the land. It was ice, sheets of it, vast and unyielding, stretched across the continents like sleeping giants. To live on Earth in this time was to live in the kingdom of ice. Imagine looking down from above the planet. You would not see the familiar outlines of continents we know today. Instead, you would see white expanses covering the north, glaciers spreading like frozen seas. Nearly 1/3 of Earth's land was hidden beneath ice. From North America to Europe, from Asia to the southern tips of the world, glaciers pressed forward, sculpting valleys, carving mountains, and remaking landscapes in their path. The ice was not passive. It moved, slow but relentless, like rivers of frozen stone. Over centuries it crept forward, grinding against the land beneath it. Rocks shattered, soil was carried away, valleys were gouged deep into the earth. Where glaciers advanced, they left scars. Where they retreated, they left lakes, plains, and new worlds waiting to be explored. The continents we walk upon today are, in many ways, the legacy of these great ice sheets. In North America, ice stretched from the Arctic all the way into what is now the heart of the United States. The Laurentide ice sheet towered over the land, miles thick in some places. It scraped across the Great Lakes region, carving basins that would later fill with water, creating the vast inland seas we know today. Without the glaciers, there would be no Great Lakes, no rolling plains shaped by their retreat. In Europe, the ice pressed down across Scandinavia, Britain and northern Germany, grinding mountains into smooth domes, scattering boulders across the countryside. When it melted, it left behind fertile soil, rich valleys, and rivers that nourished civilizations to come. The Thames, the Seine, and countless other rivers traced their courses along pathways once guided by ice. Asia, too, felt the cold weight of glaciers. Siberia, already a land of extreme winters, became even harsher as the ice pressed down. Yet even here, the retreat of glaciers carved rivers like the Lena and Ob, pathways that still shaped the heart of the continent. And in the southern hemisphere, the story was no different. In South America, the Andes were capped with ice, their valleys carved into dramatic forms. In New Zealand, glaciers reach nearly to the sea, sculpting fjords of staggering beauty. Even in Africa, where the equator promised warmth, high mountains like Kilimanjaro carried icy crowns, reminders that no place was entirely free from the touch of the frozen age. To understand the rule of ice, imagine how it felt to live beneath its presence. The land was quiet, muffled under snow. The air was sharp, filled with the whisper of glaciers moving ever so slowly. Entire regions became uninhabitable, locked beneath frozen deserts. Humanity and animals alike were forced into narrow corridors, refuges where ice could not reach. The continents were divided by cold, their pathways dictated by the will of glaciers. But the ice did not only shape the land, it shaped the seas as well. With so much water locked into frozen sheets, sea levels fell by more than 100 meters. Coastlines stretched outward. Vast land bridges emerged, connecting places that today are separated by oceans. Across what is now the Bering Strait, a broad landmass known as Beringia appeared, linking Asia and North America. It was through this frozen bridge that humans and animals crossed, migrating into new worlds. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and the first people walked across this icy highway, carrying their lives into unfamiliar continents. In Southeast Asia, lower seas revealed the Sunda Shelf, turning islands into connected landmasses. What we now know as Indonesia and Malaysia were vast extensions of Asia, teeming with life. Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania were bound together as a single continent, Sahul, its shores reaching far out into the Pacific. The continents, in this time, were not isolated as they are today. They were reshaped, connected, bridged by the absence of water in the oceans, all because the ice had claimed it for itself. Ice dictated not only where rivers flowed and valleys formed, but where humans could walk, where animals could roam, where life could spread. Yet the rule of ice was not only harsh, it was also creative. Glaciers sculpted beauty as much as they carved destruction. When the ice receded, it left behind landscapes of breathtaking form. Fjords, deep and narrow, filled with seawater and flanked by towering cliffs. Rolling plains enriched by glacial till, soil carried for thousands of miles. Lakes gleaming like jewels in the depressions carved by retreating ice. Imagine standing at the mouth of a fjord in Norway, the cliffs rising high above, the water stretching deep into the land. This dramatic beauty is the fingerprint of glaciers long vanished. Or picture the broad plains of the American Midwest, fertile and vast, their soil a gift from the ice that once covered them. The continents as we know them, shaped for farms, forests, rivers and cities, are children of the glacier's hand. For humanity, these landscapes were both challenge and opportunity. As the ice advanced, people were forced southward into narrower bands of land. But as it retreated, new paths opened. Rivers offered routes for travel and sustenance. Fertile valleys allowed for settlements. The shifting balance of ice dictated where humans could live, where they could hunt, where they could dream of building something more. And so, the Ice Age was not simply a time of cold, it was a time of transformation. The continents themselves were reimagined. The map of the world was rewritten by glaciers, coastlines redrawn, valleys etched deep, plains spread wide. Every journey we take today, every river we cross, every mountain we climb, carries within it the memory of when ice ruled. Even now, echoes of that reign remain. The Great Lakes, vast and deep, hold the fingerprints of glaciers. The fjords of Norway, the cliffs of New Zealand, the fertile soils of Europe and North America, all are reminders that we walk upon land shaped by ice. And in the quiet presence of mountains capped with snow, in glaciers that still cling to high valleys, we glimpse the last remnants of that ancient dominion. Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. The earth not as we know it, but as it was then. White expanses stretching across the continents, seas drawn back from their shores, land bridges connecting worlds. The hum of glaciers moving silently across stone, the continents bowing to the will of frozen kings. This was not a world where humans ruled. It was a world where ice commanded everything, where the continents themselves bent beneath its reign. The glaciers did not last forever. Their retreat would come, slow at first, then faster, reshaping the world once again. But for thousands upon thousands of years, the continents knew a different master. This was the age when ice ruled them all. Beneath the frozen silence of the Ice Age, a hidden archive waited. The ground itself, locked in permafrost, became a vault. With every snowfall, with every glacier's advance, the Earth preserved tiny fragments of life and memory. Not in books, not in stone, but in ice and frozen soil. Secrets buried not to be read in their time, but to wait. Wait for ages. Wait for us. Close your eyes and picture it. A mammoth collapses on the tundra, its final breath released into the biting wind. Snow covers its body layer by layer. Seasons pass, then centuries. The flesh does not rot. The bones do not crumble. The cold keeps it as it was. Muscle, hair, even the soft curve of its trunk. Time stands still around it. While empires will one day rise and fall, this mammoth sleeps undisturbed, sealed in the frozen ground. This is one of the great mysteries of the Ice Age, how the cold turned Earth into its own time capsule. The permafrost stretching across Siberia, Alaska, and the Arctic is not only frozen soil, it is a vault of history. Locked within it are animals long vanished, plants that bloomed in ancient climates, and even whispers of viruses and bacteria preserved in suspended animation. Imagine wandering through the Siberian tundra today, where melting ground reveals treasures hidden for tens of thousands of years. Hunters and scientists alike have stumbled upon entire mammoths, horses, bison, even cave lion cubs, frozen in such detail that you can see the texture of their fur, the softness of their whiskers. To touch them is to touch the Ice Age directly, without the veil of time. But the frozen ground holds more than animals. It holds landscapes. In places where glaciers advanced and retreated, they left behind layers of sediment, pollen, and plant matter trapped in ice. Each layer is like a page in a book, a frozen diary of Earth's climate. By studying these layers, scientists can read the story of shifting winds, ancient seasons, and the slow rhythm of glacial cycles. And deeper still, the frozen ground carries the memory of humanity. In caves protected by permafrost, stone tools, hearths, and even fragments of woven material have been preserved. Imagine the hands that struck those stones together, the quiet voices that echoed through icy shelters. The ground remembers what people forgot. It keeps the fire pits, the bones of meals long eaten, the footprints of children who ran through frozen dust. The secrets in the frozen ground are not only of life, but of silence. In places where ice held sway for millennia, entire ecosystems were paused, suspended between existence and erasure. Seeds, buried deep, waited. Some of them still wait. Scientists have taken seeds from frozen ground and coaxed them back into life. Plants that last grew tens of thousands of years ago, now sprouting in greenhouses. Life, it seems, can sleep through ages if the cold is gentle enough to cradle it. And yet, the permafrost also hides more enigmatic secrets. Viruses frozen for tens of thousands of years remain dormant. They're neither alive nor dead, but waiting. In recent years, as the ice melts, some of these have stirred again, ancient entities awakening into a modern world. It is a reminder that the frozen ground is not only a museum of the past, but a reservoir of possibilities, some wondrous, others unsettling. There is something deeply poetic about this. The Ice Age, often seen as harsh and unforgiving, was also protective. While glaciers scoured mountains and reshaped continents, the frozen ground preserved, holding on to fragile details that would otherwise have been lost. It is as though the Earth, knowing how much change was to come, decided to keep certain memories safe. You might imagine walking across a glacier in that ancient time, unaware that beneath your feet treasures lay hidden. A flower pressed between layers of ice. The bones of a wolf still sharp with teeth. The breath of a child captured in frost, waiting for millennia to pass before it is exhaled again into a different sky. And even today, as modern science peers deeper into these frozen archives, new revelations continue to emerge. In the layers of Greenland's ice sheet, tiny bubbles of air are trapped. To analyze them is to inhale the atmosphere of the Ice Age itself. Within those bubbles is the breath of mammoths, of humans huddled by fire, of winds that carry dust across frozen plains. It is not imagination. It is literal. The air of the Ice Age is still here, waiting in silence, hidden in ice. There is a strange comfort in knowing that Earth remembers in this way. That even as rivers change course, as forests spread and retreated, as species vanished into extinction, the frozen ground quietly kept its record. It did not judge, it did not alter, it simply preserved. But there is also a mystery. How much is still hidden? How many creatures remain beneath the permafrost, whole and untouched? How many stories of human ancestors lie waiting to be uncovered? The Ice Age was not a single story, but millions of small ones. Each frozen body, each seed, each artifact is a chapter we have yet to read. For those who lived then, the ground was not thought of as a vault. To them, it was simply the land, the hard, frozen earth beneath their feet. They did not know it would guard their lives for tens of thousands of years. Yet here we are, opening those sealed memories, piecing together their world. In the rhythm of this frozen preservation, there is also a reminder of impermanence, for just as the ice locked away the past, it also ensured that one day those secrets would return. As the climate warms, as glaciers shrink and permafrost thaws, what has been hidden emerges once again. Bones rise from the ground, ancient landscapes reappear. The secrets are no longer buried, they are revealed, one by one, to us. And so, the Ice Age continues to speak, not in voices carried by the wind, but in fragments thawed from the earth itself. A hair caught in ice, a seed that blooms again, a breath sealed in a bubble of air. These are the whispers of a world that seemed silent, but never was. The secrets of the frozen ground are endless, a quiet chorus echoing across time. They tell us that nothing is ever truly lost, only hidden, that silence is not emptiness, but waiting, that even in the coldest, stillest places stories endure. Close your eyes and picture kneeling in the snow. Before you, the frozen earth begins to thaw. Slowly a shape emerges, an animal, a tool, a seed. You brush away the ice, and suddenly you are face to face with the Ice Age itself. Not a shadow of it, not a reconstruction, but a direct meeting across millennia. This is the gift of the frozen ground. It is time, paused. It is memory, preserved. It is the earth whispering back to us softly about a world long gone. And as you walk away, you cannot help but feel the weight of that whisper. For though the ice preserved its secrets, it also left us with a question. How many of those secrets will we uncover before they melt away forever? The world does not change all at once. It shifts softly, almost imperceptibly at first. A drip of water from the edge of a glacier, a crack echoing across the frozen silence, a river that runs just a little longer into the summer. These are the whispers of transformation, the slow melting that would reshape the earth. The Ice Age had ruled for tens of thousands of years. Its glaciers had carved mountains, spread across continents, and locked oceans beneath frozen skies. But nothing in nature is permanent, not even ice. Deep within the cycles of the earth, a warmth began to stir. It was not sudden, it was not violent. It was gradual, like the slow inhale of spring after the long breath of winter. Imagine standing at the edge of an ancient glacier. For millennia, its wall of ice has seemed eternal, a frozen cliff reaching toward the clouds. And then, one day, you notice water trickling at your feet. The glacier weeps. At first, it is only a thin thread of liquid weaving through cracks, but day by day, year by year, the trickle becomes a stream. The stream becomes a river. The glacier begins to retreat. This was the quiet revolution of the Ice Age, the melting that changed everything. As temperatures rose, massive ice sheets that had blanketed North America, Europe, and Asia began to shrink. They cracked and split, their once immovable surfaces fracturing into icebergs that drifted out to sea. Each collapse sent thunder rolling across valleys, yet the greater change was not in the sound, but in the silence left behind. Where there had been only ice, now there was land. The melting was not uniform. Some regions thawed quickly, others lingered in cold. But across the world, landscapes awakened. Valleys that had been smothered in glaciers now filled with forests. Rivers carved fresh paths, swelling with glacial meltwater. Lakes formed in the depressions carved by ice, their surfaces shimmering with new life. Entire continents were redrawn, not by the hands of people, but by the quiet retreat of ice. And with this transformation, the oceans began to rise. The melting glaciers poured their water into the seas, lifting shorelines higher, swallowing coasts that had once been wide and open. Imagine a human community living along what they thought was a stable coast, watching year by year as the tide crept closer, as fishing grounds shifted, as once dry land disappeared beneath waves. To them, the earth itself must have seemed alive, restless, unpredictable. For humanity, this was a moment of both challenge and opportunity. The melting carved new routes across continents, opening plains where once there had been only walls of ice. Animals followed these fresh landscapes: mammoths, bison, reindeer, and eventually people. New rivers meant new fish to catch, new valleys meant fertile soil to explore, and warmer climates meant longer seasons of growth. But not all creatures thrived. The great beasts of the Ice Age, woolly mammoths, saber-toothed, cats, giant ground sloths, faced a vanishing world. The ecosystems they had known unraveled as the ice retreated. Forests replaced tundra, grasslands shrank, prey animals moved or dwindled. In this melting world, survival demanded change, and not all could adapt. Extinctions shadowed the thaw, like echoes fading into silence. For the earth itself, the melting was both a release and a rebirth. The glaciers had pressed upon the land with incredible weight, pushing continents downward. As the ice thinned and retreated, the land began to rise again, slowly, over centuries. This rebounding reshaped coastlines, lifted mountains, and opened new spaces for rivers and lakes. Even today, the earth continues to rise in places once pressed by ice, still adjusting to the great melting of long ago. The melting also reshaped the skies. As dark forests spread across what had been white plains, the earth absorbed more sunlight. The atmosphere shifted, winds carried warmth differently, and storms followed new paths. The climate that emerged was not simply warmer, it was alive in new ways, unstable and full of potential. Close your eyes and picture it. The frozen silence of the Ice Age softening, giving way to the sound of rushing rivers, the splash of water against stone, the song of birds returning to forests newly grown. Imagine the smell of earth freshly uncovered, damp and rich. For creatures that had known only the cold, this must have felt like a dream, an awakening into a different kind of world. And yet, there was loss within this rebirth. The melting erased entire landscapes. Vast stretches of tundra vanished beneath forests. Ancient hunting grounds disappeared into seas. Rivers swelled so greatly they split communities apart. For humans, every gain of new land came with the loss of old familiarity. The melting was both a gift and a challenge. In this, the earth was teaching a timeless lesson, that change is the only constant. The Ice Age had felt eternal, a frozen dominion that shaped life for thousands of years. But even it was vulnerable to time, to cycles, to the quiet warming of the planet. The melting did more than reshape the land. It reshaped the story of humanity. As climates softened, humans adapted, innovated, and spread farther than ever before. Agriculture would eventually root itself in the warmer soils. Settlements would grow where ice had once ruled. The seeds of civilization were planted in the thaw. Still, one cannot help but wonder what it felt like to live in that in-between world, a time when glaciers still loomed on the horizon, but forests crept steadily closer, a time when ancient animals still roamed, yet their numbers dwindled each season, a time when the ground itself seemed unstable, shifting between what it had been and what it was becoming. To live then was to stand on the threshold of two worlds, the frozen silence of the past and the uncertain warmth of the future. Even today we can feel echoes of that transformation. In the landscapes of northern Europe and North America, vast lakes mark where glaciers once rested. In the shapes of valleys and fjords, we see the fingerprints of retreating ice. In the rise of seas and the shifting of winds, the memory of melting endures. The Ice Age did not end in an instant. It lingered, stuttered, returned in smaller waves before releasing its hold completely. But the trend was inevitable. The ice receded, the earth warmed, and from that warming, everything changed. The melting that ended the Ice Age was not merely a geological event, it was a turning point in the story of life. Without it, forests would not have spread, rivers would not have swelled, human societies might not have flourished. Without the melting, the world you know today, the seas, the continents, the climate that cradles you, would not exist. So when you think of the Ice Age, do not picture only the silence of snow or the vastness of glaciers. Picture also the sound of water dripping from ice, the trickle of streams becoming rivers, the slow but unstoppable transformation that reshaped the planet. That was the true ending of the Ice Age, not destruction, but rebirth. And in that rebirth, the Earth revealed its greatest truth. Nothing lasts forever. Not the silence of glaciers, not the reign of mammoths, not the frozen stillness of oceans locked beneath ice. Everything changes, everything melts, and in that melting, new worlds are born. You've walked with me through the frozen silence of a world long gone. You've stood at the edge of glaciers, felt the stillness of frozen seas, and traced the path of giants that walk the snow. Together we have listened to the slow heartbeat of the Ice Age. And now we arrive at the quiet place where the story settles. Reflections on a world of ice. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself standing on a ridge, overlooking a valley carved by glaciers millions of years ago. The air is cool, the ground beneath you shaped by forces you cannot see, and yet the memory of ice lingers everywhere. The valley's U-shape, the scattered boulders, the lakes that shimmer like mirrors. All of these are remnants of that frozen age. Though the ice has long since melted, the earth remembers. That is what the Ice Age truly gave us. Memory written into stone. The planet itself carries the scars of ice, and through them we glimpse the immensity of time. When we reflect on this frozen past, it is tempting to see it only as distance, as something that happened to another world, another age, long before humanity's story began. But in truth, the Ice Age is not separate from us. It is within us. Our ancestors were shaped by it, adapted to it, endured it. The patterns of migration, the survival of early humans, the very roots of civilization, these were molded by the rhythm of advancing and retreating ice. Imagine the resilience it took to live then, to build fires against endless winters, to hunt across frozen plains, to weave clothing from animal hides beneath dark, star-filled skies. Humanity's creativity was born in the cold. The Ice Age tested us, but in that test it gave us strength. And still, the Ice Age did not belong to us alone. It belonged to the mammoths, who roamed like living mountains across the tundra. To the great cats, whose shadows slipped through the snow. To the flocks of birds that traced the seasons, and to the smallest creatures burrowed beneath the frost. The Ice Age was not just an era of cold, it was an ecosystem, vast and alive, each life entwined with the rhythm of ice. Now, reflect for a moment on impermanence. The Ice Age seemed eternal. To those who lived within it, the glaciers must have felt immovable, unchanging. And yet, The ice melted, the seas rose, the forests spread, the giants fell silent. Nothing in nature stands still forever. The Ice Age teaches us that truth more than any other age, that even the strongest walls of ice can give way to rivers, that even the longest winters must one day end. Think of this lesson as you listen now, perhaps resting in your own quiet room. The world around you is not fixed. The mountains shift, the seas rise, the climates change, and in every change there is both loss and renewal. What disappears gives way to something new. The Ice Age did not end in destruction, it ended in transformation. This is why the memory of ice is not only a story of the past, it is a mirror held to the present. Even today, glaciers still live on mountain tops, rivers of ice that inch forward or retreat. The poles still hold vast kingdoms of snow, silent and immense. And though smaller now, their presence reminds us that we still share this fragile balance with the planet's frozen heart. In reflecting on a world of ice, you might feel a sense of awe at its scale, but also perhaps a sense of intimacy, because the Ice Age is not only out there in distant landscapes. It is within the rhythm of the Earth itself, within the memory of our species, and even within the cycles of the stars above. Look up in your imagination at the night sky as Ice Age people once did. The constellations they saw are the same you see now. The stars look down upon glaciers and upon mammoths, upon early humans huddled by firelight. The same sky, the same Earth, but a different world. This thought ties us together across the ages like threads of ice stretched across time. And as you reflect, notice the stillness that comes with this knowing. The Ice Age reminds us that we are small, yet also part of something vast. That we walk briefly across a planet that has known oceans of fire, continents of ice, and forests of unimaginable green. Our moment is but one among many, and yet it is precious. Imagine once more the silence of an Ice Age night. The snow reflects the moonlight. The air is so crisp you can hear your own breath. Somewhere, in the distance, the call of a wolf carries across the tundra. A mammoth stirs, a fire flickers in a human camp, and above it all, the stars shine in their endless patience. That world is gone, but in your mind you can walk there. The Ice Age still lives, if only in memory, if only in imagination. So let this reflection be a reminder, not of coldness, but of wonder, not of endings, but of continuity. The Ice Age ended, but life went on. The rivers kept flowing, the forests grew, humanity stepped into a new chapter, and so it will always be. The world reshapes itself, endlessly, like ice melting into water, water evaporating into cloud, cloud falling again as rain or snow. A circle without end. We live in the warmth that followed the melting. But within that warmth lies the echo of glaciers, the whisper of a frozen planet that once was. To reflect on the Ice Age is to feel the weight of time, but also the gentleness of its passing. And now, as this long journey through the world of ice comes to a close, allow yourself to rest in that gentleness. Feel the stillness of the ancient glaciers. Feel the quiet persistence of rivers carving through stone. Feel the resilience of life, enduring through cold and change. The Ice Age is gone, but its lessons remain, written in the earth. carried in the stars and held softly in your imagination tonight. So let us leave this frozen world with gratitude for its silence, for its strength, for its reminder that nothing is forever and that every ending carries within it the seed of beginning. Rest now, with the memory of glaciers in your mind and the soft rhythm of the earth in your heart. Good night.